Hey guys, it's Bunklefy here for League Top 10, and today I am bringing you the first impressions of Jarvan, the Exemplar of Demacia, Riot's new 4800, can you believe it, 4800 IP champion. Now, I had actually previously done all of the audio for this video, some 26 minutes of audio footage of me, or not footage, of whatever, talking about Jarvan and his different stuff, and I realized that I actually would not have enough time for all the footage and everything to actually compile it all together and for it to look proper. So unfortunately I have to redo the audio and kind of cut it down a little bit in size and condense it. But I still will get to the nitty gritty of Jarvan, whether or not he's good, whether or not he's fun, and you won't be really missing out on much, just a little bit of fluff here or there. So, just to break it down, first of all, Jarvan is 4800 IP, so he is one of the newer, cheaper, quote-unquote, champions that Riot's come out with. And we know the last couple of champions, Renekton and, of course, Maokai, were 6300, and both of them came out severely underpowered, in my opinion, and in Riot's opinion as well, I believe. Jarvan, however, at 4800 IP is actually fairly balanced, which is a surprise. In actuality, all of the recent 4800 IP champions have been fairly balanced as well, needing only minor tweaks and buffs, I guess you could say. Ones that come to mind will be Trundle or Karma. Both of them only receive minor buffs or tweaks to actually make them more viable or balanced in the eyes of Riot. So I believe Jarvan actually fits that bill as well. To get it Jarvan is very fun if you enjoy playing melee or any kind of heavy tanky melee DPS, bruiser types essentially. He actually fits that role extremely well, and he does it extremely well. In fact, really the argument isn't whether or not he's viable, but the argument is he more viable as a tank or as a DPS? So what I wanted to do essentially is I wanted to kind of compare his skills and kind of talk about, are his skills more viable as a tank or more viable as a DPS? And I'm going to talk about the runes and stuff that I went in these games and talk a little bit about what I found out to be the case, how he actually became a viable champion. Now, I'm going to assume that you guys already know what his abilities do. Riot has posted a champion spotlight about it, and I can link it if you guys want to see it. So I'm going to assume you guys know what his abilities do, and I'm going to instead focus on what do they do better as. Do they do better as tank abilities, or do they better as DPS abilities? So, first of all, I wanted to make a couple of comparisons to other DPS and other tanks that I feel he could compete with. I believe overall his DPS role is decent, but I believe his tank role is a little bit above average, or a little bit above DPS role essentially. So I believe as a tank he's almost as big as a threat as Garen mid-game, but with more utility. The way his spells are made or set up with Dragon Strike and the Standard, and of course his shield with his W, which is essentially like a mini Omen, those really provide a lot of utility to your team. He is able to slow down the targets. He's able to provide with his banner an AoE armor buff as well as an AoE attack speed increase. And with his Q, he is able also to take down the armor percentage, not flat, so it actually scales as you get higher, of his enemies. And of course, coupled with EQ combo, he's able to knock them up and then use his W to slow them. So it makes for a very specific utility set or abilities, and it makes him very useful in team fights. Now, the reason I left out his ultimate is because depending on what role you go, tank or bruiser DPS, the way you use your ultimate is actually very different. So before I actually get into how you would act in team fights and how you would use your ultimate, I want to talk a little bit about the item builds I went, the runes I went, and then of course who I laned with and how I actually mannered myself in the lanes. So to start with, in the lanes, to start with, my runes I went, if I was going DPS, was Armor Penetration Red, because it just stacked again with your Q. I usually went Mana Regeneration Yellow, because he does have some mana issues, and his spells, while in team fights, especially if you don't have blue buff or, say a Banshee's Veil, is very costly. And so I found that, especially during laning phase at least, having mana regeneration in some form allowed me to spam my abilities a little bit more, because Jarvan really excels both as tank or as DPS early game using a Q and E combo, because it is extremely devastating. Now for blues, I just went cooldown reduction, and it really is up to you guys as far as what you want to go for blues. I just typically keep cooldown reduction because I like to use my abilities more. Some people choose to go more mana regeneration, others choose to go magic resist or armor, you know. Just up to you guys. As for quintessences, I still just love going flat HP quintessences on any kind of bruiser or tank champion. I don't know why, but I just really love that 80 extra HP early on. For runes, if I was going an offensive DPS Jarvan, I went mostly into the defensive tree. And I always took improved exhaust because I found that exhaust and ghost are probably the two best spells you could use on Jarvan, just to kind of lock down your enemies further. Especially if with your W and then using your E, and if you had an Omen's Randuin's Omen for the slow, you essentially had 3 different types of slow and knockups. So it really synergized really well. And Ghost, because Ghost is like the de facto of what everybody chooses to use these days, and it actually is extremely good at catching champions, and if you're melee, keeping up with ranged champions who can kite. I also took a little bit in the utility tree because in the utility tree I tried to pick up some mana regeneration just to help out as well. Any leftover points were put into the defensive tree in actually getting, the dodge masteries, not nimbleness but the forehand dodge, and then like armor. Now, if I built tank, I would go pretty much all 21 into the tank tree, making sure to pick up the reduced damage. I put, of course, 1 point into the improved exhaust, and then I went more in utility to get that mana regeneration. I really didn't choose to get the ability cooldown because I already had some blue runes to actually take care of that. So in the lane, I always took Doran's shield first. I really don't feel like there would be another item for a laning Jarvan to take. He may take Blade instead, but in my opinion, Doran's shield is probably about the best you could actually take on him, given the setups and runes that I was running. With the Doran's shield, what I did was I went ahead and I laned myself either with someone who had a slow or a stun. Jarvan laning with someone who has a stun, any kind of AoE slow or targetable slow, really makes you a beast early on. You do a lot of damage with your Q&E combo just at level 2. And with that stun, it just keeps them there that much longer for your passive to actually proc off of them. The trick is to slow or stun them long enough for your passive to come off cooldown again so you can actually use again. It's 6 seconds in between each one. So with someone who can stun or slow, you could effectively do it twice to maybe 3 times in a team fight and kill them off. And that was the case a lot. I found that I was getting a lot of my kills early game, and towards middle late game I became more of that heavy DPSer who kind of just suppressed people, or if I was a tank, just someone who disrupted and really put a lot of damage out, but in the end gave the kills to my actual DPSers or AP champions. So with that in mind, I really liked to go more tank than DPS on him. I feel that in comparison to say Zen, he's not as good as DPS mid to late game. And Zen, I don't believe, is as good as a tank, obviously, than Jarvan. So I felt like Jarvan is more of a utility tank. He has great DPS for little to no damage items. Not as good as obviously a true DPS, but given the fact that he has all the stuns and slows and everything, he works quite well. And this brings me to his ultimate. With his ultimate, you essentially, if you're playing DPS, you're not going to be using that to actually initiate, because a DPS, even though you're a bruiser, if you initiate with your R, you're going to get stunned, slowed, and pretty much rendered useless with your R. In fact, your R can actually be a hindrance to your own team, because if you use your R, you can, even if it's in a cramped area, you could essentially cut off the routes that your team could take in order to get to the champions on the other side of you. So if you did it on one side, like smack dab in the middle, your enemies on the left, your teammates on the right, they can't get through your ultimate. Also, if you're a bruiser not going tank and you lock someone inside of there, it doesn't actually stun them or slow them or any kind of snare or silence, so they can actually attack you in there. And in fact, you can actually trap more than one person in there, which can be good, but at the same time can be bad because they can focus and attack you. And of course, people can attack you from outside of it if they're ranged as well. So for that reason, I didn't use it as an initiator as a DPS. Rather, I used it as a way to catch champions running away. So if I saw a ranged squishy running away from the team fight because he was low, I could use that to catch up to him and ensure the kill. Also, if I knew I was against two people who were under geared or under leveled and they were low as well, I could use that so my team can catch up to them. But I never used it to actually initiate a fight. I always left it up to the true tank. Now, as a tank, I used it all the time to initiate. It's a great initiation tool if you're the tank because it kicks in the people's knee-jerk action to attack you. And it either forces people to use flash or ghost to get out of it, which may seem like a hindrance, but you've still already done the damage to them, and that's, you know, your real goal is to make them get out of position as a tank, and really just kind of force them to scramble. And it really just forced people to confront you right then. Plus, even after that, you had your Q and E combo to try to get another knock up and kind of get back in range with them if they did flash away. And of course your W to slow them if they didn't flash away, so once they came out of your Cataclysm, which is your ultimate, they were slowed. So I really felt like in overall his ability synergized more as a tank because especially with his W, which procs off of having more people around it, it doesn't have an AP or AD ratio, it just procs off of however many people are around it. So if you have 4 enemies around you, it gives it 4 bonus multipliers essentially to the damage it can absorb. Not exactly to the amount of slow it gives, but just it's, let's say 200 damage it'll absorb if 1 person's around. If 4 people are around, it'll absorb 320. So, you know, obviously getting in there as a tank or a melee bruiser, but especially as a tank, is really useful for that W. Now, as far as items went, I really felt like early game he didn't need any attack damage items. Either if you're going tank or just, you know, a normal DPS. I didn't really feel like he needed any attack damage items if you're going DPS until mid-game at the earliest. He really has great low base damage. So, you know, low meaning low level, base damage or low skill level. And I felt like just Q, E, and your passive combo, you know, and finishing people off with Cataclysm was quite enough. So if I was DPS, what I usually try to do is I would try to get like a Wriggles, because a Wriggles is very useful on him, I have to say. Helps him farm. It also helps with sustainability against people in lanes and in team fights, and it provides a little damage, but you're really getting that for the survivability. I also, and of course the Warp. I haven't tried Brutalizer, although I've been wanting to, because I feel like just like how I go Renekton Brutalizer and then build up later on, I feel that on Jarvan, a Brutalizer early game would help him as well with cooldown reduction, just that initial damage, and of course more armor pin. If I was going tank Jarvan, I always went usually a Heart of Gold early. And with that Heart of Gold, if my team was doing mediocrely, I would build that into an Omen. If my team was doing really well, I kept that as a Heart of Gold, and then I built a Banshee's Veil first before I built it into an Omen. And the reason why I say that is because Banshee's Veil does a couple things. Obviously, a Banshee's Veil is great for actually initiation because people, you know, waste a spell on you. Also, because of his low mana pool and his ability to spam spells fairly frequently, that Banshee's Veil is really going to come in useful for that mana. So you can use that mana really well to actually not have to worry about running out of mana, because otherwise you'd be forced to, you know, get blue or to sacrifice some runes, you know, to actually boost your mana level or your mana regeneration, or go back to Fountain later. And generally speaking, you want, you know, Golem to go to the AP carries or the jungle or whoever. So yeah, after the Banshee's Veil, I went back and finished the Omen, and then I would go into something like a Sunfire Cape. But to be honest, a lot of my games never even went that long. We were able to push towers very effectively with the use of my E, since it buffed everybody. And I've only lost 1 game out of the last 10 games with Jarvan. So I feel he is a very good champion and very balanced overall. It seems like your goal early game is to force early kills to kind of build yourself up for your late game, so that you're that tanky bruiser late game. Because his damage does kind of curve off towards late game, but you make up with it with sustainability, as well as the ability to just really disrupt the lines. And so I'm really enjoying Jarvan like that. I enjoy playing him like that. You know, one of the best things about champions is, are they fun to play? You know, that's one of those key things, rather, about champions. Maokai is fun to play, but he was very underpowered, in my opinion. Jarvan, I feel he is very fun to play and very balanced and actually, you know, viable. His first really viable tanky DPS out of the gate in a while. Renekton wasn't viable when he first came out, I don't think, and they had to actually buff him. So I will say a couple things about his balance. First of all, I feel like his Q and E is a little buggy if you're playing melee DPS. I say melee instead of tank because as a tank, you're more inclined to just use it as, you know, just disruption and E and Q to actually start the fight. Whereas if you're melee DPS, you're specifically trying to chase people down and get them with the hook, you know, E then Q to kind of push them up in the air. And because of the angles of E and Q and having to actually land 2 skill shots to actually connect, it can be very clunky to use it like that. And in that case, clunky to use his R too. So I don't know if there's a way for them to actually fix that a bit, or if it's just part of, you know, how we have him as a kit. But that's a little bit of an annoyance. Not too much of a underpoweredness or anything like that, but just an annoyance. I feel like they could nerf his early game damage just a bit, just a tad bit. It is extremely high, and I'd almost be close to say it's pre-nerf Zen high, but not quite. Slightly maybe. Yeah, just nerf a little bit of that. His late game, maybe a tiny buff late game, because I do feel he falls off just a tad bit, but nothing too much. Overall, you know, they could pretty much leave him alone. I guess you could say just minor tweaks here and there, and he'd be just fine. If you're playing as Jarvan, the best thing I could say is try to connect your E and Q as soon as possible. Don't throw down your standard and then wait, because generally speaking, people will get smart and learn just to back off immediately from the standard. So E then Q as quick as you can, and try to get good at actually positioning those so you actually connect. Also, when you Q through it, you can actually Q slightly farther than the circle. So if a person is standing slightly outside of the circle, I mean slightly, like very minuscule, you can still connect with them. You can also use it obviously to go over terrain and knock people up as well. If you're playing against a Jarvan, going Ghost and Flash are your best bets to avoid his ultimate, because that completely negates and traps him inside his only ultimate, which actually causes him to have to break it to get up to you and, you know, remove any kind of obstacle disruption that may be happening with your team. I also just, you know, if possible, keep your distance from him as best as possible if you're ranged. He really only has his W to catch up with you, and as long as you stay parallel to his banner, not actually behind it, so that he can't get in position, you should be just fine with avoiding any kind of connection with that. Overall, guys, I like Jarvan a lot. Let me know your opinions on him. I'm sorry my video is a little bit shorter than normal, but like I said, I just didn't have time to get everything organized, to have all the talking I wanted to do and go over every single ability and all that stuff in the numbers. But we can have a little discussion with it in the comments here. So just let me know what you guys thought of him, if you guys got the chance to play him. Anyways, guys, this is Spunkify out. I'll see you later. Have a good evening.